Hello and welcome to Wednesday, our weekly Zoom sessions hosted by Cowgirlblues with Jane Renton. Today we are doing cast-ons, tips and tricks. Enjoy!
Thanks, Bridget, and welcome everyone. It's so nice to see so many people this morning. It's quite fantastic. So today I'm going to look at different methods of cast-on to start off with. You'll need different cast-ons for different applications. So if you're going to do a rib or start a scarf, then those are two different cast-ons that you need. There's also something I just want to tell you about. There's a Facebook page called Camp Yarnsy. Bridget, you can confirm the Facebook page. And
yeah, post. So it's called Camp Yarnsy, and it is a private group. So you have to request to join the group. But yeah, once you joined, then yeah, just carry on.
Okay, so they've got a post from last week on all sorts of different cast-ons, and there's many more than I'm going to show you today. I'm just going to show you 4 different cast-ons today, and with it comes a table that you can download of what cast-on is appropriate for what you're doing. And I've downloaded it, and it's really worthwhile. With some very good information, very useful information. So I definitely recommend going there and having a look at that. So today what I thought of doing to start off with is the very basic cast on, and I'm sure you are all knitters already, so you already know how to cast on. But I just want to show you the different types that there are. So first of all, most of them I start with a slip knot, which I've done the wrong way around, but anyway. And it's called a knit cast on. Bridget, do you want to pin my hands? So, you know, with cast on, 99% of the time we start with a slip knot, and I'm sure you all know how to do that. And the easiest cast on of all is called a knit cast on. So I go through the stitch as if I'm going to knit it, I knit it, and I pull it and put it over the needle. I don't even need to take my needle out. I just carry on knitting and hooking over, and knitting and hooking over. And that is your knit cast on. Unfortunately, this cast on doesn't always give you a nice neat edge. If I bring it closer to the camera, you can see, except my tension is fairly even, so that's looking okay here. But it gives you these little loops.
Jane, you could bring even a little closer to the camera.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you see there? Okay, now it's going out of focus. So this cast on gives you little loops, which you don't necessarily want, and it's very much a beginner's cast on. So I'm going to show you another cast on called a cable cast on. And this one is really good for doing ribs and actually for almost anything. So this is my go-to cast on if I'm not thinking about what I'm doing and I'm just casting on. I really like the edge it gives. So I knit the stitch as I would normally to create my second stitch. But then what I do is I remove my needle and insert it between the 2 loops. And I knit again and hook it over, remove my needle and insert it between the stitches and through the 2 loops. And I knit again and through the 2 loops. And I'm just going to do a few of these. If any of you want to be trying this, then we just need to go a bit slower. If there's anyone wanting to try this, then let me know so that I go a bit slower.
So Jane,
yeah.
Can I ask you a question? For these 2 cast on methods, when would you use which one? Do you ever use the first one you showed us?
I use it when I'm teaching someone to knit, and I use it. I think only when I'm teaching someone to knit, because it's the easiest cast on of all.
Okay.
Whereas this one is my go-to cast on. You can see what a really nice edge it gives. There's no funny little loops, and it has some stretch to it. So it does work nicely for a rib as well.
Yeah, so you keep it quite loose, basically.
Yes.
The tension, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And
because you go.
Sorry, this one's called the cable cast on.
Sorry.
This one is called the cable cast on.
Yes.
And it gives you an edge that looks like a twisted cable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because you end up going through the whole stitch, you can't end up having the stitch too tight, which is why it creates a looser cast on. Because you just cannot pull that tight because you've got the needle in the way. So I really like this one for a variety of applications. And if I bring it closer, can you see what a neat cast on that gives?
Yeah, it looks beautiful.
So another cast on, and this one is very similar to the cable cast on, and it's called a crochet cast on. So this time I use a crochet hook and I put the slip stitch onto my crochet needle.
Jane, is this the one you did for your log cabin squares?
No, the log cabin square, I did a provisional cast on. So what I did was I did a chain, a crochet chain. So I can do the crochet chain now. And to do the provisional cast on, you do a chain of more stitches than you're going to need to cast on with. And when you're done, you cut off your yarn and then you end up with a piece of chain. When you turn the provisional cast on over, can you see there's these little bars that go across? Those are what I knit into and pick up my stitches. And when I've knitted it and done my work and want to then join again from the bottom, then you just undo it. And your knitting stays there and you end up with a whole lot of stitches that you can pick up. It works really nice. The provisional cast on works really nicely as well if you're doing fair isle knitting and you block your work, you do the whole garment completely with the provisional cast on for the rib around the waist and for the rib around the cuffs. And then you block your work without blocking the rib. Once you've blocked your work, you then undo that provisional cast on, put your needles on and knit the rib. And you haven't then blocked the rib and stretched it. So the blocking of a fair isle works really nicely when you do the provisional cast on and just start knitting your fair isle. So let's go back to the crochet cast on. And I put this onto my slip stitch onto my crochet hook. And this time I'm going to hold the yarn in my left hand the same as if I am going to be crocheting. And I hold the needle over the yarn but under my crochet hook. Okay, can you all see that? And I pick up the yarn and pull it through. I then take my needle and my crochet needle underneath my needle and the yarn underneath my needle. Sorry, the crochet hook over my needle with the yarn underneath. And I do my next stitch. And yarn underneath and crochet. Yarn underneath and crochet.
Jane, what
So,
are the benefits of this cast on, or when would you use this cast on?
So this one gives you a nice firm cast on. So if you're doing an edge of a shawl where you're not really wanting any stretch, if you're doing something where you're not doing a rib first, it's a really nice firm cast on. And can you see, if I bring it closer, it gives you a chain stitch edge. Can you see that?
That's amazing, Jane. It's so cool.
It is. It really is.
It's so beautiful.
And it's just crocheting with the needle in the way. That's all it is. A crochet and your needle is in the way. So the crochet hook, so you're not really crocheting, but your stitches end up on your needle. And I really love that edge. I'm just thinking when else you would need it. I just want to find that thing I downloaded. The crochet cast on. So it's brilliant for projects that are a chunky weight cowl where the top and bottom edges will be visible and easily compared. So if you've got a really visible edge, then that's really nice to be using the crochet cast on. And that's from the information from that Campianzi site. And then another cast on, and we've already looked at it when we did the 2-color cast on. And this one is the long tail cast on. But I'm sure many of you who have used the long tail cast on will cast on a whole lot of stitches you haven't finished casting on and you've run out of tail. And that is the most frustrating thing of all. So the way I work out how much yarn I'm going to need for a project is I take my needle and my yarn with a short tail and I wrap my yarn around my needle 10 times. And then hold my yarn against my needle. I remove my needle, and that is approximately 10 stitches. So if I want 20 stitches, I double it. If I want 40 stitches, I double it again. And then I know that I'm going to have the right length of tail to be able to cast on all the stitches I need. Very, very simple way of sorting out your long tail cast on, how much you're going to need. So I was about there. So we're just going to cast on a few stitches. To do the long tail cast on, I don't worry about a slip stitch. So this is one instance. This is the 1% of time when you don't need a slip stitch. I put the yarn on top of my needle and I hold it. I like to create tension with the yarn. So I twist both yarns around my baby finger and insert my first finger, my index finger and my thumb to open that up. So do I need to do that again? I create tension by twisting both threads around my baby finger. Both yarns are together, so I insert my index finger and my thumb and open it up. So to do this now, I come over the yarn in front of my thumb, back to the yarn over my index finger, and I pull it through. And then I use my thumb to tighten it. So I'll do that again. Over the yarn in front of my thumb, over the yarn and under the yarn on my index finger, pull it back through the yarn that was on my thumb, pull it through and tighten it. Over, over and under and through, over, over and under and through, over, over and under and through. And I really like this long tail cast on because with your thumb, you can determine the amount of tension on each of your stitches. So you don't want to end up with just a loose stitch, and you don't want to end up with such a tight stitch that you can do nothing with it. So you can determine the amount of tension. And again, you can see there's a really, really nice edge to it. It's nice and straight. And it can therefore be both a firm cast on and a loose cast on. So this is another cast on which works for almost any type of application. You can see there's the back of it and there's the front of it. So those are the 3 different types of cast on.
Okay. With that long tail one, you do yours a little differently from how I do mine, and it wasn't clear to me whether which is the short tail and which is the yarn end that you're working with there.
It doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, you're going to end up in the same place anyway.
Okay. So
and
if you've got enough yarn in the tail, you're going to be fine either way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you do the calculation by holding the yarn and winding it around your needle, you know you're going to have enough yarn for your tail.
Yeah, great.
Okay. And not too much yarn either, because sometimes you see people who have done this long, long tail and they've got more than a meter left over. So this way you don't end up with that. So another thing that I wanted to look at is when you are knitting a garment. So first of all, what I'd like to say is when you knit a garment and you've got your pattern and it tells you that you need certain size needles and a certain number of stitches and a certain number of rows to get 10 centimeters. We all knit differently. So I always do a test swatch. Always, always, always. It is much easier to do a test swatch this size than to knit half your garment and realize your tension's wrong. If I feel that my tension swatch has used too much yarn and I don't have enough left over for the project, I can always undo it. And then I will have enough left over. And if when you knit your tension swatch is bigger than the recommended size, go down a needle size. If your tension swatch is smaller than the recommended size, go up a needle size. And sometimes if your knitting is really tight or really small, you might need to change your needles by 2 sizes. So, and the other thing is if I'm knitting something where I'm designing it and I want to check that the cast on that I'm using is right for the project, that the rib is going to be right for the project, and that I like the pattern that I've designed, then again, I will always knit my tension swatch. And sometimes I'll knit a few tension swatches to choose the pattern that I'm wanting. So here you can see, I'm going to be working on a cable knit jersey, and I'm not wanting the regular knit 1 rib, or even the purl 2 knit 2 rib. I'm wanting to do something a bit differently. So if I bring this closer, you can see here I've done a twisted rib where it's a cable, a one cable. I've got, it's 2 knit stitches and then 1 purl stitch. We did do this a couple of weeks ago, so I'm sure the Bridget has that video if you want to see how to do it. And this gives me quite a nice stretch for that twisted rib, the cable rib stitch that I've got there. The other half, what I did was a 2x2 cable. And I really like that as well. So before I decide which one I'm going to use, so what I did was I did half with the 2-2 cable and half with the 1-1 cable. Before I choose which one I'm going to do, I'm going to end up knitting 2 more swatches with 2 different patterns. And from there, I'll decide if I'm going to use the 2-2 or the 1-1. The 2-2 doesn't have quite the same stretch as the 1-1. So this would give me more of a jacket look. Whereas this, I could use it so that it pulls in at the waist. So it's also, which design would I like to use for my cable cardigan that I'm going to be making? So, and having done that, I can look at it, put it aside, decide which am I happy with. Am I happy with my tension overall? Did I use the right size needles? And here, this is the Cowgirlblues double knit and a 4mm needle. And can you see the lovely definition that I've got to my cable stitches? I really, really love how that has worked out. It's given me the most amazing definition to this pattern. If I go up, I will lose some of that definition. And the same if I go down in needle size, I will also lose some of that definition. So for me, for this project, this size wool, 4mm needles with my knitting tension is absolutely perfect. And I'm really loving that and looking forward to getting this cardigan done. So that's the tension square. Cannot stress enough the importance of a tension square. And I know many people say, oh no, I can't be bothered. Be bothered. It'll save you a lot of time.
Jane, I was, I stumbled on an article online yesterday evening that was by some Scottish designers who were talking about tension and gauge in knitting pattern design, and saying that they actually started creating their patterns without a recommended knitting needle size, and said it's the gauge size needle, so whatever needle you need to get the gauge that they're talking about, because they used to get so many people saying, oh, but I knitted my hat and it doesn't fit, and they would say, swatch first and get the, did you knit a tension square and get the gauge right? And they'd say, no, I didn't. Like, oh, surprise. Because often with jerseys, people will do the gauge swatches, but with smaller projects, people don't, because they want to just launch straight into them. But it is, if you want the fit that the designer has described in the pattern, you have to knit the square and get the right size needle, because we all have different tensions. And what might be a 4mm for you with the DK might be a 3mm for me if I knit very loose, or it might be a 5mm if I knit very tight. And so it really is essential, if you want your project to look the same as the way the pattern was designed, that you absolutely have to do a tension square and get your gauge right, because also you won't get fit and things if you don't have the right tension. So
absolutely.
That tension square.
So I think I've said it before, I've got a whole lot of tension squares in a drawer, and one day I'll take them out and crochet them all together, and I'll probably have quite a reasonable sized blanket with all my tension squares, and it'll be a little meander down memory lane looking at it and using it. So it's never going to go to waste, all those tension squares. So the other thing I want to show you is when you knit a garment, I'm just going to show you on a bought jersey here. On a raglan sleeve, or on any sleeve, actually, you want the two sides of your join to be identical. You want it to look neat and professionally finished off. And the stitch that you use on the one side is different to the stitch that you do on the other. When you knit two stitches together, depending on the method of knitting those two together, your stitch will either slant to the left or slant to the right. So when you're doing a garment, up the left-hand side of the garment, you want the stitches to generally slant to the right. And then on the right-hand side, you want the stitches to slant to the right. And that gives a more professional finish to your work. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. But what I also want to show you is I always like to have the edge of my work, and I'll show you here, with a neat edge. Can you see that edge? It's very, very uniform and very straight. And if I turn it over, it's the same.
That edge looks beautiful, Jane. Wow.
Always, always. I do tend to be a perfectionist though. And the same on the other side. There is the edge and there's the edge, both sides. When I'm doing a cardigan with where I'm going to end up knitting a rib, if I have an edge like this, it is so easy to pick up your stitches and knit your rib. So to achieve that, what I do is I always, right from the very beginning, I slip my first stitch. And if my first row is going to be a knit row, I will slip this stitch with my yarn in the back and my needle through the front of the loop and just slip it off. I slip it off as if I'm going to be knitting it. And then I will continue to knit. Okay, I'm going to be showing you the decreases. So I just want to show you the slipping, and then I'll show you the decreases. The other thing that I recommend is find a way to hold your yarn so that you have a good tension over your fingers. Okay, so I'll carry on with that in a minute. I just want to show you the slipping purl wise. So I'm going to be purling this row. I bring my needle underneath the yarn as if I'm going to purl, and I slip it. And then I carry on purling. If you have an even tension over your fingers when you knit, then you end up with an even tension in your work. If you don't hold your yarn properly and you just hold it in your fingers, pick it up and drop it and knit, you're not going to get an even tension on every stitch. So I carry on purling. And Cindy, you asked, I only slip the first stitch, not the last stitch.
And Jane, you don't knit the last stitch through the back of the loop or anything like that either?
No, because there's my last stitch and I'm crocheting, at least not crocheting, I'm knitting purling my last stitch. So when I start on the front, then I can see I've already got a knit stitch, which I can just slip off and carry on knitting. So because I'm going to be decreasing on this side, I want my stitch to lie to the left. So there's two ways of doing it. And I'm just going to knit the second stitch. You can either knit the two stitches together through the back of the loop. Okay, that takes your stitches to the left. And can you see that? The main stitch is leaning to the left. When I get to the other end, so I've left 2 stitches, so I'm going to knit to my last 4 stitches because my next 4 stitches, right. So now I'm on my left hand side and I'm going to want my stitches to line to the right. And here I can knit the 2 together through the front of the loop. And can you see how it's lying to the right? Can you see that? There we are. What's happened to the audio?
I'm mute. So a couple of questions coming through. So Kelly has asked, do you always knit 2 together through the back of the loop, not just knit 2 together?
So I'm going to show you another way of doing this knit 2 together through the back of the loop. For the right hand side, decrease when you want your stitches to the left.
So the knit 2 together leans to the right, and in order to get it leaning to the left, you need to knit 2 together through the back of the loop?
Absolutely.
Okay, so knit 2 together and knit 2 together through the back of the loop, pair up to give a left and a right leaning decrease.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely.
And Jane, sorry, can I pop in another question here that's related to the beginning and ends of rows?
Yes.
So what do you do if you have to make a stitch at the beginning of the row? How do you deal with the slipping? Do you slip one and then make?
So if I need to, okay, I'll show you in a minute, but can you see here, I've knitted 2 together through the back of the loop, and can you see it's leaning to the left? And then on this side, I knitted 2 together and it's leaning to the right. Can you all see that? So let me just do that again. So this time I'm going to do what's called an SSK. So I slip it, slip the next stitch, insert my needle through the front of those 2 stitches and knit them together. That also gives me a right leaning, at least a left leaning stitch. Can you see that? So those are the 2 options, through the back of the loop or the SSK, to give me a left leaning decrease. Okay, and what I always use for the right leaning decrease is the knit 2 together. It's by far the easiest of all. So I knit 2 together on the left to give me a right leaning decrease. And you can already see what is happening here.
Jane, when you decrease, you always want to leave it, so you want to first knit 2 stitches and then decrease. You don't do the decrease at the outer edge.
No, because that will affect how my edge looks.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's better when you need to start decreasing, just to have 2 stitches normal, then you decrease.
Or even, so you can even just do it with 1. You slip your first one and then do your decrease, or do 2 and then your decrease.
Yeah.
I like the look of when you're doing a raglan sleeve, I like the look of that edge you get up the arm edge with the double line with 2 stitches. So generally, if I'm doing a raglan sleeve, I will slip 1, knit 1, and then do my decrease. And then knit the last 4 stitches and knit 2 together and knit 2. I just like that rib. That's my personal preference. It's not cast in stone. It's just mine.
Jane, I think that a lot of contemporary knitting patterns are created from the top down. So instead of decreasing, you're increasing, but
yes,
effectively work the same way. And typically they have 2 stitches in between the increases so that you get that you get that little line. In fact, I've actually got a project I'm working on. I'll go and fetch it, then I can show you.
Okay. So the other thing that I do is on a purl row, if I want to enhance this left lean of my stitches, that third stitch from the end is my decreased stitch. I'll purl it through the back of the loop. That's just something extra that I do, and then that enhances that left lean. Can you see by having gone through the back of the loop how much more enhanced that 2 stitches of I don't know what you call this, how the decreasing looks and the leaning of the stitches follows.
That's a very nifty trick on the purl side.
Yes.
And
yeah.
you don't need to do anything for effectively at the beginning of your purl side row for that one. You just need it on the 2 together through the back of the loop or the slip knit.
Yes. Yeah, you just need it there.
Okay.
So I'm also just wanting to knit to the end of my yarn here because I want to show you how to join yarn when you're in the middle of the row. So you can see I haven't got much of a tail left, and I'm not likely to get to the end of my row. And there are different joins that you can do. One of the joins is what is called a splice. You take your yarn and you need a tapestry needle. And you thread your yarn through the tapestry needle. You don't need much of a tail on the needle. And you have your other piece of yarn and you just put it over it. So that when you go through the yarn, that join is caught. So what you do is you just very carefully go in between the twist. Can you see what I'm doing there? And then I pull this through. I hold onto it very tightly with my finger and my thumb, and I pull that needle through. And it's joined on that side, and now I need to do the same on this side. So with my other piece of yarn.
So Jane, someone's asking if we can get a little closer for this. It's quite tricky because the camera can't always focus when you get too
Okay.
close. Maybe you can bring your hands a little closer to show on this one.
Okay. So what I'm doing is I hold it quite nice and tightly over my index finger, and I pick up a thread and just keep picking up a thread so that I'm working inside that twist. And I don't worry if sometimes I pick up 1 little thread and sometimes I pick up 3. Doesn't really matter.
Jane, before you pull it through, will you bring it even closer so that we can just see what it looks like?
Okay. So can you see it looks like I've got a whole lot of stitches, but it's a whole lot of threads.
Yeah.
Does that work?
That's helpful.
So then what I do is I hold that is over my needle really tightly with my index finger and my thumb, and I pull the needle through. And I pull the tail through, take my needle off, and I pull that and pull that, and I can take my 2 threads and pull. And I can now knit with that and snip these tails off. And I can carry on knitting as if I've got no join at all. This works really nicely when you're doing a pattern where you can't end up weaving your threads at the back through. Okay, and that's called splicing.
It's also called a Russian join, I think.
Oh, is it? Okay. So this, if you're knitting a cable knit jersey where you don't necessarily have control of, because you have so many purl stitches on the right side, you need to have some way of hiding your yarn. So you can splice them. Another way of doing it is...
So Jane, with that one, I think the one thing to just be aware of is that it's much easier to do when you've got a plied yarn. So if you've got a single, it's very difficult because you can't find the space to go.
Yes and no, unless you're using an Aran single.
Yes. Yeah.
An Aran single is nice and thick, so you can still do this with the Aran single. You can't do it with a lace single. There's nowhere for the needle to go. Okay. So then the other way of doing it is to weave your yarns through. So I make sure that I've got enough of a tail to still knit a few stitches and have that tail woven through on the other side. So I only do this when I've got my stocking stitch on the front and the purl side is definitely my wrong side. That's the only time I can do this. So I take the end of the yarn and put it over my needle. And I just hold it there over my needle and I knit. And now I can hold it in my left hand. And I'll knit the second stitch, holding that yarn below. And then I'm going to bring it over the top and knit, and below and knit. And can you see how the two yarns are being woven through at the back?
That one's also very nifty.
It is. So then I'm going to change yarns now. And I'm going to knit my first stitch with my second yarn. And here I've got my knit two together. So I'm going to knit two together, but I need to be weaving this tail. So I'm just going to hold it over the top, knit those two together, and hold it down below while I knit my next stitch, and bring it to the top while I knit my last. And I can then keep going with my olive green yarn, and the turquoise is finished and it's woven through at the back. And can you see how neat that looks? Is that clear enough for everyone?
It looks good.
Okay.
Can everyone see? Does anyone have any questions? So far, looking all right?
So far, so good. Okay, so then another way that I do it, if I can't splice my yarn and I can't weave it through at the back, there is another method. So my third stitch through the back of the loop and purl the next two stitches. And can you see how I'm getting a nice ridge for my decreases?
Yes.
Okay, so another way that I do it is I'm going to just knit a few stitches here and bring in another yarn. And through the back of the two. And I'm going to just cut that off. And I'm going to bring in another color. So if the yarn is too thin for me to splice or weave, I will take my two threads and just hold them together quite tightly and continue knitting with my new thread. I don't knot my work. I don't like knots. I don't like the way it feels at the back of your work. And I don't like it. That's me, personal choice. And when I get to where the two threads are joined, well, have come into the work, should I say, I just carry on and I pull each one of them a little bit tighter and I carry on going. Now I just need another row to show you how I get rid of those threads. And you can see there's a little bit of a hole, but we will fix that up now. Can you see I've got a bit of a hole? It doesn't matter because what I do is this. So I'm going to, actually I need to have a couple more rows, sorry. And I'm just going to stop decreasing, otherwise I'm not going to have any room to do this. Okay, I do now. So what I did was the light blue is on the right and the olive green is on the left. So I'm going to want to bring the olive green to the right and the light blue to the left. And that, by doing that, if I turn it over holding those, my hole is gone. Can you see that? But now to secure those, again, I need my darning needle. There it is. And I'm going to thread my darning needle on my needle. I'm just going to take my knitting needle out. And I'm going to be following the line of the thread and the stitches. So essentially, I came out here and in there.
Jane, can you go a little closer to the camera because it's quite difficult to see? There we go.
Okay, can you see now? Is it clear?
It's better.
Okay, I'm going to want to follow the light blue stitches so that I don't end up having the light blue showing on the right hand side. So if I follow through and put my needle in where this stitch comes out and it goes up to there. Can you see that? Is that clear?
Yep.
And I pull that through. Let me just take my olive out the way. That stitch now goes over the top and back down the bottom.
So you're effectively weaving it in following the knit row.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what I'm doing.
Where that row goes in, you're going in and then following the loop of the knit round so the stitch comes back up again.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. So, sorry, my olive is getting in the way. And if I go to the front, you can't see I've done anything with it. And the same with the olive.
Side teaching note, you didn't need to pull the knitting needle out of the stitches. That's not part of the class. Just so fingers can access the stitches.
Yes.
You normally have cast off or done something.
Yes, normally you would have. I do this at the end. I just leave my tails hanging until the end. So now here, the olive is needing to go across to my left because I've turned my work over.
Can you come closer? Yep.
Okay, so I'm going in there and out where my olive green comes out, and I'm following the line of that stitch. It usually goes through 2 rows. So it's in and it's a diagonal across. because if I were to open up the stitches and you follow the line, you'll see it is a diagonal path that the yarn travels in. So it goes out and through, and I keep doing that until it's done. And at the back, once I've cut off my ends, it's also all neatly finished off. And on the front, you can't see anything. So I did that. Let me just grab I'm nearly finished with my log cabin blanket. I'm doing the last border. And where have I done that? I've got to look where I've done it, because usually I've woven it through. Oh, here we are. Here's a join. Here's a join where I've done it. So here I joined 2 colors. And I have done a garter stitch, so I don't really want that the join to show. And over time, or even after the first wash, these ends are going to end up being felted in, so you're not going to see them. And it looks like it's part of the stitching on the front. And I'm just trying to think where else I have it. And I've used it here where I've done joins. This is better because you can hardly even, other than where I've got my threads, you can't see that I've done the joining. And where else have I done it? And mostly I've woven through when I've joined colors with my log cabins. I've woven the yarn through as I've gone along. It's only in my border that I've done the tails, which I've woven by needle, tapestry needle. So are there any questions? I think I've gone through everything I wanted to do for today, because I thought I'd do increases next week, and the making of stitches for increases. There's a making of a stitch, there's the knitting front and back, there's a yarn over, there's a number of ways of making a stitch. And I thought I'd cover that next week. Are there any questions?
That sounds great, Jane. Thank you. Sorry, I've had to relocate due to the grinding going on the other side of the wall from where I was sitting. Anyone have any questions? So someone has asked, can you ask which join to use when cabling?
When I'm cabling, I use, generally I use the one I've shown you here, where I have my 2.
The last one you showed.
The last one I showed, yes.
Okay, so that one where you don't tie a knot in the yarns, you just hold them tightly together in your left hand and switch, and then
Yes.
left with a little hole, and you cross them across each other and then weave the yarns away through the stitches once it's finished.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It doesn't affect the structure of the yarn. You can, at least of the piece you're knitting, you can see it has the same amount of stretch as it would normally. And even when it stretches, you still can't see where I've done any of that weaving through.
Okay.
So if I hadn't used 2 different colors, you wouldn't see that.
Yes.
And on the front side, you don't see anything.
Looks very neat.
Okay.
Just to clarify, Jane, so someone also asked this last one that you did, will it be sure enough and not come out? And I thought maybe you'd only gone through a couple of stitches because you didn't have very many stitches in your work to work through. How many stitches would you normally weave in and out of with that?
I do essentially 2 stitches. So it's 4 stitches, but only 2 stitches across on either side. So
Is
it's
that
2
all?
and that's all.
And it
Because
doesn't pull out.
it doesn't pull out.
Wow. I think I'd be a little nervous to just do 2.
It doesn't pull out. And especially if you're working with wool felts.
Yeah, so it holds on to itself.
It does hold on to itself. So even though I've only gone 2 stitches across, it's 1 at the bottom, 1 at the top, 1 at the bottom, 1 at the top.
Perhaps
So essentially,
with cotton or bamboo, particularly bamboo or something that's very slippery, you would need to do a little more.
absolutely. And bamboo is a nightmare to knit with.
Conversation.
We won't go there.
And then also just to go back to another question about what do you do if you have to make a stitch at the beginning of a row?
So we will look at increases next time, but I don't increase a stitch in my first stitch.
Okay.
I
So,
always flip.
sorry, if you were knitting a pattern that said increase 1 at the beginning of the row, you would still just keep the first stitch neat and increase on the second stitch.
Absolutely, but I wouldn't but there's a few ways of making one.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, so I'll show you that next week, but I never do it on my first stitch, even if the pattern says so.
Yeah, and the same with decreasing. You don't do it on the first stitch, you do it on the second.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Second or third with decreasing, and increasing also second or third.
Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have any? Cindy's asking, can you show some basic cast offs?
Can I show you next week? Because it'll take as long to show you the cast offs and decreases. It is increases as it has to show you the cast ons and increases.
Well, can you perhaps just show your very basic cast off with those stitches you've got there?
Okay, I can show you.
On your square, sorry, on the one where you're doing your little decrease and increase swatch.
Let me see what I've got here. So if I were going to do my normal decrease.
No, sorry, a cast off, not a decrease.
I mean cast off. That's what I mean, cast off. Okay, so I've got I always slip my first stitch, even when I'm going to cast off. Slip my first stitch, knit my second stitch, and then I pick up that stitch, the first stitch, over the top. Knit the next one, the first stitch, over the top. Knit the next one, and over the top. And you can see the edge that it's giving me.
You see that sort of crochet edge.
Yes, yes.
Very nice.
Okay.
And the crochet cast on is a nice one to pair with this.
Yes.
As a cast off, depending on how your edges are going to show in your project, whatever you're making.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So, and the crochet cast off is very, very similar to this.
Yeah.
I see your tension is quite nice, that your cast off makes it look so easy.
So that's where I spoke about having a decent tension with your yarn over your hands as you work, so that the yarn slips through your fingers as you want it to with each stitch. So I never have to rearrange my fingers and the yarn in my fingers. It doesn't get tighter and tighter. This gives me a nice flow as I pull my hand away.
And unfortunately, this is one of those things that's just years of practice. And when you watch a skilled person do it, it looks really easy because they have been doing it for years and years. And
so,
yeah, I think it's great that Cindy asked that question about the basic cast offs, because it's nice to just show a little taster of here is the most basic cast off. And if you need more information, you have to come back next week to watch some more tips.
Yeah, what I also wanted to say quickly is if you're going to hold your needle on top and you're going to pick it up each time, you've got to hold your thread against your needle. And that as well is how do you know that every stitch is the same? So I encourage you all to work out a way of holding your work and having your yarn and your needles rested in your hand so that each time you make a stitch, it's not a huge amount of effort. And the work stays rested in your right hand. And you can see how easy it is to knit.
For you, Jane, for you. I mean, I knit in a similar way, so I understand. But if you are not such an experienced knitter and you find it more tricky, then don't be disheartened, because it really is just a factor of practice.
It is, and I understand trying something new because I've been teaching myself how to do the continental way of knitting, where you hold the yarn in your left hand and you knit. And to teach yourself a new way of knitting and a new way of getting your tension right, I completely understand that there can be problems. So I do encourage perseverance, because I've noticed that as I go, the more I do, the quicker my knitting becomes when I'm doing a knit stitch continental style. It is that much quicker.
So Jane, have you started knitting continental and purling UK?
It doesn't look right.
Yeah,
I don't know what it is, but the purling the continental way is, I find, a bit cack-handed, because you've got to be bringing your yarn to the front. But as I get more proficient, then I will probably change to continental style knitting.
Yeah,
but your tension right. Sorry?
I think it does have a lot of benefits, but it is hard.
Yes. The knit stitch is really easy. The purl stitch is not that easy.
Yeah.
So I quite understand how difficult it is to change your method that you've always used. But if there's a better way of doing something, I believe it's worthwhile doing it in the long run.
Great. Thanks so much, Jane.
Pleasure.
That was...
Are there any other questions?
What other questions have people got?
I'd like to make a comment about the continental knitting. Last November, I was in Latvia and I went to a knitting workshop where they were teaching how to do their wonderful, intricate, multicolored mittens and things like that. And the lady had 4 different colors, one color yarn on each finger on her left hand, and she just was knitting at an amazing rate with 4 colors on her left hand.
Amazing, yes. Yeah. I rather use 2 in each hand if I'm going to do it. So then I'll knit with my right hand, I'll knit UK English style, and on my left hand I'll knit continental style.
Yeah.
It's easier than trying to arrange.
I was just flabbergasted that anybody could even concentrate which color to go where, when.
Yeah.
On mini needles.
Yes.
It's such a good point, though. Doreen asked, what are the benefits of the continental way? And I think when you are doing color work, you're only knitting, because typically you're doing those in the round and you're only knitting, you're not purling. And that then is the perfect situation for using the continental technique. And I've been to Latvia and had the same experience of just being mind blown by how dexterous experienced knitters are with those multiple colors. And I think it is a lot easier to what they call pick the colors than it is to be dropping and changing and moving them around. So Yeah, that's a good point.
So if I,
Jane, Cindy has asked if you could please show how you wrap the yarn around your right fingers. So can I put us back to your hands camera?
okay, I'll do that. So what I've got here is I've got a yarn in each hand, 2 different colors. And if I'm going to do one stitch, I'm going to knit one English style, knit one continental style, one English style, one continental style. And that makes it so easy with knitting. I'm not changing hands. So you want to know how I wrap my yarn. I take the yarn, let me use other needles. So what I do is I take the yarn, so I've got the tail in my left hand, and I pick up the yarn with my baby finger, and then pick up the yarn with my middle finger. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way around. I've got a tangle of yarn here. Sorry. I'm going to have to just undo something here. There we are. So if I've got that tail in my left hand, I wrap the yarn around my baby finger, wrap it in my middle finger, and then it's in place. I'll undo my stitches just now for me to then knit.
So, Jane, I'm a little confused by that because you now you have the short tail in the other hand. You need to.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is
Next stitch.
Let me just do a quick cast on, then I can show you.
We've lost your camera. Something's come unplugged. There we go.
Well, no, it hadn't come unplugged. It's telling me my battery's low.
On to sleep.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the same if I'm in a cast on. So I've got my tail in my left hand, and pick it up with my baby finger and wrap it around. Pick it up with my middle finger and wrap it around, and then bring my needle through, and you can see that my index finger goes underneath, and I've got my yarn around my baby finger, my middle finger underneath my index. So I can then cast on. I'll do that again. Here's my ball of wool. Around my baby finger, around my middle finger, index finger underneath, and I'm ready to work. Okay, do you want me to do that again? So baby finger around, middle finger around, index finger underneath. Okay. Okay.
And this will go onto YouTube, so you will be able to go and have a look and replay at your leisure if you want to.
Yes. Okay.
Wait.
And that gives you a nice tension that if you slowly move your hands through, it keeps going with an even tension all the way. Okay.
Thanks so much, Jane. Looking forward to seeing what you have in store for us next week.